Imagine, for a moment, a killer so meticulous, so unbelievably careful, that even decades later, investigators are still utterly baffled. These aren't just random acts of violence. These are the work of predators with chilling patterns, distinct methods, and a haunting, terrifying ability to evade capture. Despite years of grueling investigation, shifting theories, and even the advancements of modern forensics, their identities remain a total, terrifying mystery. Were these crimes the work of singular, calculating individuals, or is there something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface? Today, we're going to explore 4 of the most perplexing unsolved serial murder cases. Killers who disappeared into the shadows. Killers who perhaps are still out there. That thought alone is absolutely horrifying. And that's why I'm telling you this today, because I want you to be safe. My little baby girl. Yes, even you, the 40-year-old man watching this. I'm calling you baby girl. So, without further ado, let's unbuckle our seatbelts, go Mach 5 down the highway, slam on the brakes, and bust through this windshield into these 4 unsolved murder serial killer cases together. We begin in Oakland County, Michigan. 1976. Picture tree-lined suburban streets stretching across affluent communities north of Detroit. This was a place where children played freely in parks, rode bicycles without supervision. The good old days, before cellular phones and instant communication. It was an environment of perceived safety that would soon be shattered. This pervasive sense of security created the perfect hunting ground for a predator. Between 1976 and 1977, a chilling series of events unfolded, launching what became the largest manhunt in U.S. history at the time. A task force processed over 18,000 tips and interrogated more than 1,500 suspects. The nightmare began on February 15, 1976, when 12-year-old Mark Stevens left the American Legion Hall in Ferndale. What should have been a routine walk home turned into an irreversible tragedy. 4 days later, Mark's body was discovered in a Southfield parking lot, carefully arranged on a pile of wood and dirt. The autopsy revealed a disturbing level of premeditation. Mark had been strangled and sexually assaulted with a foreign object. Rope marks on his wrist and ankles showed he'd been bound, and 2 lacerations on his head suggested violent trauma. Police investigated but found nothing, just sickening. Less than a year later, on December 22, 1976, another family's world collapsed. 12-year-old Jill Robinson left home after arguing with her mother. Her bicycle was recovered the next day, but Jill remained missing until December 26, when her body was found alongside Interstate 75 in Troy, and this is perhaps the most disturbing detail. There was evidence she had been cared for during the 3 days before her murder. She was still wearing her backpack, fully clothed when found. It's just like the killer was obviously a monster, but there was a side of him that felt remorse for these kids, or felt like he still needed to treat them like kids, but he literally killed them. The pattern continued on January 2, 1977, when 10-year-old Christina Hellick vanished after visiting a set. Her ordeal lasted 19 days before her body was recovered on a rural road in Franklin Village. The killer had smothered Christine less than 24 hours before placing her body, and get this, her body was positioned very carefully, within view of nearby homes, a signature of the perpetrator's methodical approach. He wanted these kids to be found. The premeditation and planning before these murders is just insane. He thought about how, when, and exactly how they were going to be found. The final confirmed victim, 11-year-old Timothy King, disappeared on March 16, 1977 during a trip to a local pharmacy. When found 6 days later in a shallow ditch along Gill Road in Lent, Timothy had also been sexually assaulted with a foreign object, but most disturbingly, he had been fed Kentucky Fried Chicken, his favorite meal, shortly before his death. It's like the killer was trying to make up for everything he did, just thinking that would wipe his slate clean. What distinguished these murders was the meticulous attention paid to the victims. Each body was found in public areas, meticulously cleaned and dressed. This unnerving level of care led the perpetrator to be dubbed the babysitter killer. Despite different causes of death, investigators linked the cases through consistent physical evidence, including golden carpet fibers and white animal hair found on all the victims' clothing. These tiny fibers and hairs led investigators down a very disturbing path, directly to a network of wealthy individuals with connections to child exploitation. Just the scum of the earth. As detectives pursued these forensic clues, they uncovered a case far more complex than a lone predator, suggesting the possibility of powerful figures working to ensure certain suspects remained beyond the reach of justice. Just corrupt bullshit. Christopher Bush emerged as one of the most compelling suspects. The son of a wealthy General Motors executive, Bush had already been convicted as a pedophile and maintained connections to an organized child exploitation network operating in Norfolk Island. The timing was particularly suspicious. Police had questioned Bush shortly before Timothy King's abduction. Even more disturbing, evidence linked him to a child-exploiting ring run by Francis Sheldon, suggesting access to vulnerable children. In November 1978, Bush was discovered dead from what appeared to be suicide, an easy way out for a piece of shit. But the scene raised immediate red flags. Bloodstained ropes lay nearby, and a hand-drawn image resembling victim Mark Stebbins hung on his wall. The suspicious circumstances intensified when the entire Oakland County task force disbanded just days after Bush's death. Some investigators later suggested his death may have been staged to prevent him from revealing accomplices or powerful associates. That sounds right to me. Yet, the case against Bush collapsed in 2012 when DNA testing excluded him as a contributor to biological evidence found on the victims. Bet you didn't expect that. This forensic setback occurred despite the wealth of circumstantial evidence pointing to his involvement, which, I still think he was involved in some way. Other suspects presented equally promising yet ultimately inconclusive leads. Ted Lamborghini, a Detroit auto worker who operated a pedophile ring in the Cars corridor, became a primary suspect in 2005. A convicted murderer, Richard Lawson, implicated Lamborghini. But when offered a plea deal in exchange for taking a polygraph regarding the Oakland County murders, Lamborghini refused. Just scum of the earth. DNA evidence also led investigators to convicted Pete Archie Sloan in 2012. Forensic testing revealed that hairs found on the victims matched hair recovered from Sloan's vehicle. Curiously, the DNA didn't match Sloan himself, suggesting someone who had been in his car or that he let borrow his car for nefarious, murderous reasons. But perhaps most telling was James Vincent Gunnels, who had actually been sexually assaulted by Christopher Bush as a teenager. Forensic testing found his DNA potentially matched a hair on victim Christine Mihelic, though the statistical probability was too low for conclusive identification. Gunnels has consistently denied any involvement. Time marched relentlessly forward while justice stood still. Nearly 5 decades after the horrific killings that terrorized Oakland County, the case remains unsolved, despite remarkable advances in forensic technology. For Timothy King's father Barry, the quest for answers became his life's mission, and his journey unfortunately ended in 2020 when he passed away without ever learning who murdered his son. The systemic investigative failures point to disturbing possibilities. An exceptionally meticulous killer, protection of connected individuals through institutional interference, or fundamental errors in the initial investigation that can never be remedied. Whatever the truth, the Oakland County child killer case stands as a sobering reminder that even with extensive resources, justice remains tragically elusive for some victims, leaving their families to endure the cruelty of uncertainties. My heart goes out to the victims and the victims' families. Whoever did this, I hope you're rotting in hell. Now, let's move to a different time and place. Glasgow, Scotland. In the late 1960s, the city was experiencing cultural upheaval common throughout Western societies. Its working-class population found escape at venues like the Berdella Ballroom, a popular dance hall where young people gathered to celebrate. Against this vibrant backdrop, a series of murders began. On February 22, 1968, 25-year-old Patricia Docker attended the young nurse and mother left the venue alone and was discovered the following morning in a doorway near Langside Place, strangled and partially clothed, her personal belongings missing. Patricia balanced complex responsibilities, working night shifts as an auxiliary nurse while caring for her 4-year-old son, Sandy, during a separation from her husband. That fateful evening, she told her parents she was visiting the majestic ballroom, but instead went to Burrowland, known for its over 25s nights where attendees often removed wedding rings, seeking temporary anonymity from their complicated lives. Some shady shit going on in the 60s. I tell you what. Our second victim would be Jemima McDonald. Jemima maintained a household as a single mother to 3 children. Described as clean and well cared for, Jemima ensured her children were properly looked after despite the challenges of sole parenthood. Her murder in August 1969 fractured the family unit she had worked so hard to maintain. The aftermath proved devastating, as her 3 children were separated and placed in different care homes, causing a secondary tragedy beyond the initial death. Just heartbreaking. And then we have Helen. Helen had recently returned to Glasgow with her husband, George, an army serviceman, and their 2 young sons. The night of her murder in October 1969 represented a rare evening of personal freedom, a brief respite from maternal obligations while her husband remained home with the children. The cruel irony is that Helen was killed steps away from the domestic safety she had temporarily left behind. All 3 women shared significant commonalities beyond their connection to birth. Each was a mother seeking brief independence from their demanding domestic responsibilities. The over 25s night at Borrowland offered a socially acceptable outlet for married women to experience autonomy in an era of limited freedom, and perhaps most significantly, each was menstruating at the time of death. Such an odd biological detail that potentially influenced the killer's victim selection. The bright lights of Glasgow's Barrowland Ballroom concealed a methodical predator whose selection process went beyond mere opportunism. This venue, where Mari patrons often removed their wedding rings for anonymous encounters, provided the perfect hunting ground for a killer whose approach suggested calculated, religious motivations rather than random violence. So, he was seeking these people out specifically. People who were set out to be unfaithful to their partners. He did not like that one bit. When investigators initially focused on the majestic ballroom rather than Berowland after Patricia Darker's murder, they inadvertently compromised crucial evidence collection during the critical early hours of the investigation. This error proved significant as the pattern of Berowland connections became apparent with subsequent victims. Witnesses consistently described the suspect as exceptionally well-dressed and articulate, attributes that distinguished him from a typical violent offender. His polite, charming demeanor allowed him to gain the trust of women at the venue, facilitating their willingness to leave with him. This calculated approach indicated premeditation rather than impulsive violence. This man was a hunter. The religious underpinnings of the crime emerged most clearly during Helen Pudik's taxi journey. Her sister Jean Langford, who was with her, heard the suspect quote scripture and condemn the Berowland as a den of iniquity. Jean further recalled that he mentioned he did not drink but prayed instead, suggesting a strict religious upbringing that would later contribute to his infamous moniker, Bible John. Forensic examinations revealed a disturbing ritualistic element at each crime scene. The deliberate positioning of sanitary items near the victim's body indicated the killer harbored specific feelings, possibly connected to biblical notions of impurity. This consistent pattern, combined with the strangulation method employed in each murder, pointed to a signature that evolved while maintaining core elements, potentially indicating the killer's growing confidence or adaptation to avoid detection. This guy was unfortunately smart, extremely calculated, and extremely judgmental to consenting adults. As the ritualistic elements at the crime scene became clear, Glasgow police mobilized in unprecedented numbers. What began as a standard murder investigation transformed into Scotland's most extensive manhunt. Yet, it would ultimately fail. Despite groundbreaking tactics and compelling witness testimony, the investigation pioneered forensic techniques never before seen in Scottish policing. Most notably, authorities created and widely distributed the nation's first police photo fit of a suspect in a murder case, plastering newspapers and television broadcasts with a composite image. The manhunt's scope was extraordinary, with undercover officers dispatched to blend among Berowland patrons in what the press dubbed a Marine Formation dance team. Plainclothes detectives scanned the dance floor for anyone matching the suspect's description. Jean Langford's account of the taxi ride with her sister Helen and the suspect provided investigators with extraordinary detail, a mixed blessing that shaped the entire investigation. While her testimony offered a first-hand description of the killer's appearance, mannerisms, and religious rhetoric, over-reliance on her singular account potentially narrowed the investigation, causing detectives to dismiss leads that didn't precisely match her recollection. I mean, we're not built to remember somebody perfectly, but that was all they had, so that is what they went for. The undercover operation at Berowland continued for months until late October 1969, when it was abruptly terminated. The cessation came not from any investigative breakthrough, but due to complaints from proprietors about plummeting attendance figures as patrons avoided the venue now associated with a serial killer. Basically, a bunch of people were bummed that other people got killed and it ruined their swinger party, I guess, because that matters more than solving people's murders. I don't know. Decades later, in 1996, investigators exhumed the body of John Irvine McGuinness for DNA testing, a costly operation that yielded inconclusive results and triggered substantial media backlash. More troubling revelations emerged in 2022 when the BBC podcast, Bible John, Creation of a Serial Killer, alleged that McGuinness may have been protected due to familial connections with a senior officer involved in the original investigation. Again, just corruption everywhere. Even convicted murderer Peter Tobin fell under suspicion due to striking similarities in methods and victimology, but was ultimately eliminated because records confirmed he wasn't in Glasgow during the murders. So, we're left with another unsolved serial murder case. Hopefully, this bastard is dead. In the mid-1990s, the Belgian city of Mons became the backdrop for a series of gruesome discoveries. Women began vanishing without a trace, only for their dismembered remains to surface in garbage bags across rivers and roads with unsettling names like Path of Worry and Hate River. The precision of the cuts and the eerie choice of disposal sites pointed to a methodical and deeply disturbed killer. Despite the formation of a dedicated task force, the investigation was plagued with mismanagement, lack of resources, and dead ends. As the body count grew, so did the mystery. Was the killer a lone predator, a trained professional, or something even more sinister? In January 1996, a pattern of disappearances began that would haunt Mons for years to come. Carolina Russo, a 42-year-old woman, vanished after visiting her imprisoned son on January 4th. Her disappearance might have remained just another missing persons case. But 17 days later, fishermen made a grim discovery in the Scheldt River in northern France. It was Russo's pelvis, deliberately severed from the rest of her body. This marked the beginning of a series of methodical, dismembered victims. 6 months later, Martine Bone, a 43-year-old former sex worker, disappeared on July 21st. Her dismembered torso was subsequently recovered from the Haine River. Investigators noted a particularly disturbing detail. Her breasts had been deliberately removed from her body, suggesting a sexual motivation behind the killer's methodology. just a monster. The precision of these cuts initially led authorities to consider medical training as a prerequisite for the predator, or some sort of butcher, somebody who had worked with bodies before. The pattern continued into December when Jacqueline Leck, a 33-year-old mother of 4, went missing on the 22nd. Unlike the previous victims, her remains weren't discovered until March of the following year, when officers recovered garbage bags containing her severed arms and legs. The delay between disappearance and discovery raised questions about the killer's storage capabilities. By March 1997, 21-year-old Nathalie Godart became the 4th victim. Though not involved in sex work, investigators noted she had been described as promiscuous and was struggling with personal issues, severe enough that her child had been placed in protective care. Her torso was recovered from the same waterway as Bones' remains, the Haine River. The killer's final lone victim would be Bonia Valencia, a 37-year-old woman with schizophrenia who disappeared during the summer of 1997. Only her skull was recovered in the area, suggesting an evolution in disposal methods or decomposition that prevented further remains from being located. He was just getting a lot better at hiding the remains. Forensic analysis revealed disturbing details that investigators initially overlooked. The preservation state of various body parts differed significantly. Some appeared relatively fresh, while others showed evidence of refrigeration. This indicated the killer likely stored dismembered parts for extended periods before actual disposal. This suggested both access to suitable refrigeration facilities and a disturbing level of planning. Perhaps most chilling was the killer's apparent psychological signature in the selection of the disposal sites. Locations with macabre names became favored dumping grounds. Rutalab, Shamandu Droit, and rivers with unsettling names like Haine. This deliberate selection of symbolically charged locations suggested a perpetrator who incorporated psychological elements into their methodology. Yet, the Belgian judicial system's response proved remarkably insufficient. Despite establishing a specialized investigative unit, authorities gradually abandoned their pursuit of the butcher while dismembered bodies continued to appear throughout the region. In the aftermath of the killings, Belgian authorities formed the Corpus Investigative Unit under Magistrate Pierre Pled. This represented the nation's most concentrated efforts to identify and apprehend the methodical killer terrorizing monks. However, from its inception, the unit faced substantial institutional constraints. Despite the brutality and sophistication of the crimes, Belgian officials classified the case as merely local, failing to allocate adequate resources for what was clearly a complex serial murder investigation. The systemic dismantling of the investigative effort became evident as years passed without an arrest. By 2007, what had begun as a substantial team had been reduced to only 4 investigators. This dramatic reduction occurred even as the unit had examined nearly 1,000 complaints over 13 years, demonstrating a very troubling administrative indifference to solving the case. The lack of modern forensic techniques available at the time further hampered investigators, limiting their ability to extract DNA evidence or effectively share information across international borders. The investigation eventually developed significant international dimensions. In 2007, Montenegrin authorities arrested Mikhail Tolj, who emerged as the investigators' most compelling suspect. Tolj's crime history included a strikingly similar murder in New York in 1990, where victim Mary Bill was dismembered and placed in garbage bags, a methodology nearly identical to the butcher's signature. Additionally, evidence against Tolj included his confirmed presence in Belgium during the Mongs murders, his romantic connection to the New York victim, and bloodstains discovered in his apartment. Yet, investigators never secured conclusive proof linking him to the Belgian killings. Tolj's death in a Montenegrin prison in 2012 permanently foreclosed any possibility of obtaining a confession or conducting additional DNA comparisons. But good riddance anyway. Other suspects emerged throughout the investigation. Jacques-Antoine, a French doctor, became a person of interest after his son wrote letters to police accusing him of carrying black trash bags while living in Mongs during the murder period. But these accusations ultimately held very little weight, undermined by inconsistencies and the son's peculiar focus on his father's firearm collection rather than behaviors related to this. Basically, just a kid who wanted to get rid of his father. British citizen John Sweeney, convicted of dismemberment murders in both Amsterdam and London, represented another plausible suspect based on his potential presence in Belgium between his known killings. However, authorities never established a definitive connection between Sweeney and the Mongs murders. Just another piece of shit, I guess. The butcher of Mongs' case exposed system failures in Belgian law enforcement, turning a major manhunt into a disjointed, under-resourced investigation. Experts suggest that the killer's meticulous planning skills and possible medical training allowed him to evade capture while preying on society's most vulnerable. The case's mishandling has fueled discussions on understanding perpetrator psychology and underscored the need for interagency cooperation and proper resource allocation. Though officially unsolved, its legacy has influenced investigative reforms, ensuring greater institutional accountability, changes that, while too late for the victims, may help prevent similar failures in the future. With that, we move on to our last unsolved serial killer murder case. San Francisco's foggy beaches and secluded parks became the hunting ground for this methodical predator. Ocean Beach, with its desolate stretches of sand shrouded in mist, served as a backdrop for the doodler's first confirmed murder. January 27, 1974, the body of Gerard Earl Kavanaugh was discovered there, bearing multiple stab wounds. The 49-year-old's death marked the beginning of a pattern that would terrorize the city's gay community for 18 months, leaving bodies scattered across Ocean Beach, Golden Gate Park, and Lincoln Park. The pattern linking these homicides together emerged gradually. Kavanaugh's defensive wounds indicated a violent struggle against his attacker, the 17 stab wounds demonstrating a level of aggression that would become a characteristic of the killer's approach. Investigators initially treated this as an isolated incident, failing to recognize the beginning of a systemic campaign of violence. Only 5 months later, the killer struck again. Joseph Stevens, known professionally as Jay, was discovered near Spreckles Lake with 5 stab wounds. The location of his abandoned car suggested he had willingly accompanied his killer to the secluded area of Golden Gate Park, likely anticipating a sexual encounter. As a performer in San Francisco's nightlife, Stevens represented a more visible target within the gay community. The brutality escalated drastically with the third victim, just 12 days after Stevens' death. So, his cooldown period had drastically gotten shorter. Klaus Crispin's body appeared at Ocean Beach. The German visitor suffered what investigators described as an extraordinarily vicious attack, with slashes to his throat so severe they appeared to be an attempted decapitation. This marked a significant intensification in the killer's violence. Then, nearly a year would pass before Frederick Kappen became the 4th victim. The decorated Vietnam veteran received 16 precisely delivered stab wounds that pierced vital organs, including the heart. Evidence at Ocean Beach revealed his body had been dragged 20 feet through the sand, suggesting the killer was becoming more methodical in positioning his victims. The final confirmed kill was Harold Gore, who was discovered in an advanced state of decomposition on June 4, 1975. At Lincoln Park, the 66-year-old Swedish-American's body told a different story. He had been dead for approximately 2 weeks and was found with his underwear removed and pants unzipped, further confirming the sexual dimension of these crimes. But this wasn't even the end, as police had no clue during the investigation if more bodies turning up truly were from the same murderer, or just random acts of violence. Behind the gruesome murders lay a method as distinctive as it was disturbing. The doodler's artistic talent transformed ordinary bar encounters into deadly traps. His approach demonstrated a calculated precision that set him apart from other killers operating during the same period. The doodler prowled San Francisco's vibrant gay scene, primarily targeting establishments in Castro, Polk Gulch, and Tenderloin districts. Popular venues became his hunting grounds, where he implemented his signature strategy. Rather than relying on physical intimidation, he disarmed potential victims through his artistic abilities. He would sketch portraits of men he encountered as a non-threatening means of introduction. One survivor actually recounted meeting the killer at a diner where he was drawing animals on a napkin, using this talent as a conversation starter. This deceptively innocent approach allowed him to establish trust with his targets, who would willingly accompany him to secluded locations, typically near water. These isolated areas, known as gay hookup spots in the 1970s, provided both privacy for sexual encounters and the perfect setting for murder. The violence of the attacks just indicated extreme rage, and the killer would strip victims of identification completely, making it more difficult for authorities to connect cases and identify the deceased. 3 individuals survived encounters with the doodler, providing crucial details about his methodology. A European diplomat suffered 6 stab wounds but managed to escape with his life. Another survivor, described as a well-known entertainer, fled when a knife fell from the attacker's coat, revealing his deadly intentions before an attack could commence. The 3rd survivor left San Francisco entirely and refused to cooperate with investigators. The psychological profile that emerged suggested a perpetrator struggling with his own identity. The extraordinary violence directed at gay men indicated possible internalized homophobia, perhaps a person unable to accept his own homosexual desires and projecting that self-hatred onto others. We've seen this in multiple other serial killer cases involving the gay community. Witness descriptions consistently depicted a young black man between 19 and 25 years old, approximately 6 feet tall, who demonstrated both artistic skill and a capacity for extreme violence. The psychological assessment pointing to internalized homophobia took on a disturbing new dimension in late 1975. A psychiatrist contacted police about a patient who had confessed to the Ocean Beach murders. This revelation brought investigators tantalizingly close to solving the case. Yet, the doodler would ultimately slip through their grasp due to circumstances that reveal as much about 1970s America as they do about the killer himself. The investigation was led by a formidable team. Ora Guilford and Earl Sanders, African-American homicide inspectors nicknamed the Soul Brothers. They had earned reputations for their meticulous work, and had constructed a very detailed case file that included a police sketch and a narrowing list of suspects. When the psychiatrist came forward, investigators believed they had finally identified their perpetrator. These guys looked badass, that's awesome. Under questioning, the prime suspect acknowledged his struggles with identity but denied committing the murders completely, and without physical evidence definitively connecting him to the crimes. Authorities found themselves in an evidentiary stalemate. The case now hinged entirely on testimony from the 3 survivors who had encountered and escaped the doodle, but the socio-political climate of the 1970s created an insurmountable barrier to justice. Basically, homosexuality remained classified as a mental illness by the American Psychiatric Association until and the stigma persisted long after gay men faced potential loss of employment, housing, and social standing if publicly out. For the European diplomat, testimony would have meant career destruction. For the entertainer and the well-known survivor, public identification as a homosexual threatened their livelihoods and personal safety. Relations between law enforcement and the LGBTQ+ community further complicated matters. Police raids on gay establishments were common practice throughout the 1960s and even early 1970s, fostering a deep institutional distrust. Many gay men viewed police not as protectors, but as persecutors, making cooperation with authorities a fraught proposition, even where their own safety was at stake. Harvey Milk, who would later become San Francisco's first openly gay elected official, captured the impossible position of the survivors when he stated, "I understand their position. I respect the pressure society has put on them." This acknowledgement from one of the community's most prominent advocates highlighted the devastating reality. Societal homophobia had effectively granted the doodle immunity from prosecution. So, this serial killer got away with it due to society being shit. Just a big society piece of shit. Despite the advances in forensic science and investigative techniques, these 4 cases remain some of the most haunting unsolved crimes in modern history. The Oakland County child killer, Bibo John, the butcher of Mongs, and the doodle each left behind not just a trail of victims, but an enduring sense of unease. Their identities obscured by time, speculation, and incomplete evidence. While theories abound from lone predators to potential conspiracies, justice has never been fully realized for the victims. As these cold cases continue to be revisited with new technology, one pressing question remains. Could one of these elusive killers still be alive today, hidden in plain sight? I don't know, but what I do know is that I care about you, and I want you to stay safe. So, be safe out there. Let me know what other cases you would like me to go over down below. Cold cases are always good, I think, to shine a light on them. You never know who's going to see. You never know what's going to happen. These people, these monsters, I hope they're rotting in hell. I hope you're just cozied up with some popcorn and a snack or something. I hope you have a good rest of your morning, afternoon, or night. And I will see a beautiful face in the next video, okay? Stay safe out there.